Good evening, Dr. Niall. This is 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. evening in India, and we are sitting in New Delhi, and you have joined from UK. Welcome to the fourth edition of the world's longest and largest environmental online event, Earth is Calling Act Now. And I'm very grateful that you're here today. I remember 4 years back when I messaged you the first time, you so happily replied, and despite your so busy schedule, despite your lectures, adventures, explorations, you have been with us for throughout all these 4 years. You've always made sure that one of the videos somehow you had a bit of contribution to our event also. I'm so grateful because we our target audience is mostly youth and young students, and when they are able to interact with people on the ground level who have such high profiles, but they have spared their time to talk to them, it's the greatest inspiration that we can give them. So thank you very much and most welcome to this show, this event. I have two young students from Model School Jelly, and they will be asking a few questions they're prepared for you. And I'm sure that you'll put in your expertise into covering into your answers, not only the cause that you work for, the life that you have led, but also to the event itself. Thank you so much. I hand it over to Barminder now to proceed with that. Before that, Dr. Niall, an opening statement from you.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Barminder, a 12-year-old and an Act Now youth volunteer from Modern School NCR, Delhi.
Good afternoon, Niall sir. I'm Nandini. I'm 13, an Act Now youth volunteer from Modern School NCR, Delhi.
So, beginning with the first question, we believe in the undeniable healing powers of outdoor and adventure. Millimeters to mountains has really put to test the very grit of human nature. So please let us know what propelled three young men with life-changing spinal cord injuries to climb Europe's largest ice cap in just 11 days.
Thanks for the question, Barminder. So as a bit of background for those that are listening, I had a spinal cord injury in 2016, which results in quite a bit of paralysis from my waist down. And as a result of that, I've met various other people who have also suffered similar injuries. And two of these guys, Darren and Ed, I've become quite good friends with. Darren is a complete paraplegic, so has zero sensation from his chest down. And Ed is an incomplete quadriplegic, so has partial effect of everything from his neck down. We came up with the idea of trying to ski across Europe's largest ice cap, which is called Vatnajökull. It's in Iceland. It's 140 kilometers wide. And then having to manage all of the issues of a spinal cord injury while also doing what is a difficult enough expedition for an able-bodied team. All of us have issues regulating our temperature, controlling our bladders and our bowels, just with strength and coordination and all of these things that would normally make it challenging enough for any human being, let alone what we were going through. We put together this expedition, and in 11 days from middle of April earlier this year, we managed to ski across Vatnajökull, which, yeah, we suffered or endured every possible condition you can imagine, from pouring rain down to minus 27 degrees centigrade. Quite astonishing change in climatic conditions, but had some wonderfully serene moments as well. We witnessed sundogs 22 degrees either side of the sun. We witnessed a mirage which brought a mountain over the horizon from under the horizon as a result of the mirage, and various other exceptional atmospheric phenomena, as well as just having a great time. We got on really well, and we were very fortunate to succeed and finish in 11 days. And now, yeah, settling back into life at home is easy by comparison, but we're delighted to have overcome that challenge.
Wow, so that's actually quite moving.
Thank you. And I should have probably said that Millimeters to Mountains is the charity that was set up by Ed, which helps to support people who've suffered mental or physical trauma and uses adventure in the outdoors as their means of recovery. And we're thrilled to have been raising money and to continue to be raising money for Millimeters to Mountains, which is a charity of which I'm also an ambassador.
Thank you,
So
sir.
moving to the further question, when I opened my eyes for the first time on this planet, I found myself surrounded by technology. Do you think technological development is a threat to environmental conservation?
Great question, Nandini. Inevitably, it's both a threat and potentially a solution, like all of these things. As we have industrialized, we've needed more and more energy, and generating that energy and the materials that we need in order to to fulfill our industrial ambitions as nations are damaging on the planet. But now we have all of those things. We also have the technologies that we need in order to be able to reduce the damage that we are having. But I think it's important that we also don't forget that the best technology out there for keeping the planet healthy and safe and in balance is nature itself. We can use AI, we can use tech to try and solve the problems that we have created. But the best solution for those problems is to invest in nature and in nature-based solutions.
So moving on to the next question. Maintaining biodiversity is a huge challenge, and our lives as humans depends upon it. Yet we see scientists suggesting one thing while politicians are implementing, or rather not implementing, quite the contrary. So how do you think we, as youths, can bridge this gap?
Great question. I think one of the issues we have is that political life cycles are quite short. So politicians are thinking in terms of 4-year voting cycles or 5-year voting cycles, whereas as scientists, we're thinking in terms of generations, many generations. And what is now apparent is that the mistakes that were made by the previous generation and have been made by the current generation are having a manifest impact on our lives now. So the best time to act was 40 or 50 years ago. The second best time to act is right now. So we need to crack on. In terms of what the youth can do, I think there's a lot of things to bear in mind. You will be the politicians of the future. So please don't forget that you are engaged on a planet that needs us in perpetuity, not just in terms of 4-year voting cycles. So when you are in politics or in power or in positions of influence, use that wisely. Even if you're not a politician, you are at least a voter. We have a democratic right to elect the people that then implement the policies that are in their manifestos. Use your vote very, very wisely. I think all too many people are a little bit short-sighted about how they use their vote. And if you're voting for politicians that are enacting policies that are damaging the planet, you are voting to damage the planet. And likewise, the converse, if you're voting for people that are protecting the planet, you're voting to protect the planet. A massive thing in today's day and age is the power of the employee. And as people graduate, you are going to become a very, very valuable resource to companies. If you are unwilling to dedicate your labor, your work time to companies that are damaging the planet, then those companies will have to change their practices. There's no market for Shell or BP or Exxon if there's no employees. So understanding that your labor is valuable and powerful, I think, is a really important thing. And especially those of you that are lucky enough to have considerable talents that are really attractive to these types of organizations, they know that they need the best people. And if the best people won't work for damaging companies, then those companies will change their practices.
Sir, speaking of youth, I'd like to ask you, what is a piece of integral advice you'd like to give me right now as a 12-year-old to work towards our environment?
Yeah, believe that you can make a difference. And you can. 12-year-olds have just as much understanding as I do at 41, really, when it comes to the world. And maybe probably less cynicism and you're less bashful. So one of the things I've come to understand is that politicians will listen if you go and knock on the door and speak to them. Businesses will listen if you knock on the door and speak to them. Most adults lose the courage to do that for some reason, but children tend to have that courage. You're not afraid of authority to knock on the door and speak to people that are your elected representatives and that are the companies that represent your local area. And keep on doing that as you get older as well. Do not lose the courage of youth.
Sir, as we all know, you are one of the foremost wildlife explorers in the world. What makes you engage with such deadly creatures?
Yeah, I guess lots of things. I was really lucky to be brought up in a family of people that loved spending time in wildlife, in nature, and got a bit of extra enjoyment out of spending time with the types of creatures that see us as legitimate sources of food, or that are particularly dangerous for one or other reason. But my dad really, really encouraged me into this type of thing. My mum really encouraged me into this type of thing. And my brothers have had very, very similar trajectories to me. But we still have to forge your own path. And there comes a time when you stop sitting in the shadow of your parents and you start to branch out on your own. And I realized at some point in I guess my late teens and early 20s that I wasn't just doing these things because my parents wanted me to, but because it was important to me too, and because I loved it too. I love spending time in nature. I love interacting with wildlife, dangerous or otherwise. And I love spreading the message to the rest of the world that we need wildlife for our own survival, and it needs its own, it has its own rights to survival at the same time. So yeah, I was very lucky to grow up in a family that introduced me to this, but now it's part of me. It's not just something that my parents encouraged, it's very much a part of me.
So, as we see, hear, and know, we've already made colossal mistakes in handling Mother Earth and its graceful creatures. So, how can we, as citizens of tomorrow, mend our wrongs and fix our extremely broken relationship with nature and wildlife?
Yeah, you're right. Our relationship with nature is broken, but it's fixable. And I think things are changing. People are understanding that we aren't just living on the planet alone, and that we have to share it with our fellow inhabitants. And that if we don't, the consequences for our own societies are dire. What I want young people to understand is that you are the way that we're going to guarantee that happens in perpetuity. We still need my generation and the generation above to stop behaving so badly and to start changing our practices. But we need pressure from the youth. And that pressure comes in many, many forms. As I've said before, it comes from voting, it comes from employment, but it comes from innovation as well. It's your innovation that's going to enable us to find sustainable ways of continuing our economic growth. As societies, we build our economies based on some form of growth, but that has to be within the confines of a finite planet. There's no such thing as infinite growth on a finite planet. And it's the innovations of youth that are going to enable us to continue to have successful and thriving economies on a planet that is also able to thrive.
So, as a very committed conservationist, where from do you draw your strength to work tirelessly for the cause? That includes supporting ACT now.
Yeah, I guess I partially draw my strength from my family in that I was brought up to believe that that we as humanity are not alone on the planet, that we share it and we need to share it. And given an understanding that nature is wonderful in and of its own, let alone for the impact that it has on us. And then I guess I've been surrounded by people that are utterly dedicated to protecting the planet as well for so long. People I've chosen to surround myself with. And I've also seen the opposite. I've seen people that have a throwaway attitude to life, that are unconscious in their consumption, or even consciously negative in their consumption, consciously over-consuming. And I've developed a really strong intolerance of people who spend their lives and don't try and improve the planet around them. And that improvement can be small, just by having a positive impact on your friends and family around you, or it can be large, changing policy that affects our climate and biodiversity. But I really believe that everyone that has the ability, and everyone should have the ability, should try and have a positive impact on the planet while they're here. We only have one chance, really. And well, certainly within my belief system, we only have one chance. And so the time is now, we must act.
Dr. Niall, that brings a question that I would like to ask. When we started this event 4 years back, it was an offshoot of Corona times because we couldn't have physical conferences. It was difficult to get people around, and we started it all. And then we said we are going to run a 24-hour event because usually we have this planting day that occurred from one corner of the planet to the other corner of the planet. We ran this event, but it happened. And later on realized it's possible on this platform to try to bring youth and students in touch with real climate champions, which would be otherwise impossible. So again, thank you very much for being with us. But we often cite that the youths play a major role in environmental conservation, and they have a major role also in reversing the triple planetary crisis of climate, pollution, and biodiversity loss. But in practice, the support is very less. You either have to be influential youth or belong to an influential family or somehow to be picked up by bigger agencies. The policy makers have a problem. They can make policies, they can't implement them. Governments are short-sighted. And we know that people on the ground level, the NGOs, smaller ones, not the bigger ones, the youth, especially at young age, because they have the audacity to challenge anything, they have to be involved. unfortunately, what has happened that not all youth change makers also reach down. Once they acquire the position, they're always going up. They're not looking down. For instance, even this event, when you try to get them on board, it's very difficult. Some of them are very supportive. They come because I believe then, like these two girls are interacting with you, maybe after this interview, they'll be lifelong supporters of conservation. So how do you think we can provide support? And how do you think it can be changed, or maybe majority of smaller people on ground level and more youth can be involved directly in the process?
Yeah, we just have to keep on engaging. Education's a big part of it, but engagement's more important. So I receive a lot of emails from students and young people around the world, and I respond to every single one. And I really think that people have got themselves into a position of influence, should take that influence seriously and see it as a responsibility. The types of people that feel responsible for the planet, I would hope, would also feel responsible for engaging the youth in planetary protection as well. So my challenge to everyone that's got themselves into a position of seniority is to not draw up the drawbridge after you. Keep it open for the next generation coming through. Keep engaging people. Go into schools. Go into universities. Spend time on the front lines with local wildlife groups, enthusing them. People need encouragement. People don't survive well in a vacuum. They need to have constant reinforcement that they're doing the right thing. And so those of us that can, we absolutely should spend as much time as we possibly can within our busy schedules, further engaging the youth in protecting the planet, because that's what we need. We need to keep people engaged. Every child is born with a love of the planet, every single one. At some point, most children become cynical and start doing things that are selfish and not outward thinking. What we need to try and do is break that connection somehow and make sure that adults still have the same enthusiasm for the world and the same spirit of collectivism that children do. That's a difficult thing to do, but we've got to try.
Yeah, and because of people like you, we are doing that, and we are very grateful. I'm also supportive of the UNEP because they also been in support, and I keep telling them that this is the platform you got to be outside the UNEP buildings and UN buildings, and this is the platform that you can actually make a lot of influence in the young people's lives. So thank you very much. Barminder, you have a question again?
Yes, sir. So you've mentioned several times that studying extinct species is your prioritized skill. It is your love and passion. So how can we, as commoners, help these dying and disappearing species?
Well, I wouldn't consider yourself a commoner, for starters, or if you are, then I would also consider myself a commoner, because we all start from very similar backgrounds. Just believe that you can do it yourself. So yeah, people like me, absolutely, it's great to have the support of people like you. And the simplest way to do things like that is to look for small charities and try and raise some funds or profile for those small charities that are operating on the front lines. But really, I think the best thing to do is to look at yourself and what can you do physically yourself. And yeah, believing that if you've seen someone else make a massive change in the world, you can do it too. If you've seen someone else go out and work in an amazing environment and make a difference to a species or a habitat, you can do it too. I think what's most important is that people believe in themselves, and that support could be remote or it could be in person. Both are very, very important.
So, I want to be an explorer and conservator. How do I go about it?
Yeah, well, the simplest thing is to pick a place on the map that looks interesting and then go there. Not much more difficult than that. So my early explorations were simply to places in the world that looked interesting to me. And then from a biological perspective, so when I was starting to study species, again, it was what am I interested in? I'm interested in giant otters. Where do they live? They live in the heart of the Amazon. So I've got to go there to try and find them. So whatever it is that fascinates you, that makes you passionate, that interests you, book your flights or book your bus ticket and go find it.
Sure, sir. That's the next thing I'll be doing now.
Fantastic.
So speaking of studying giant otters in the Amazon, you've led many remote jungle expeditions. So could you share how you faced and successfully overcame extreme minimalism and simplicity during these missions?
Yeah, I guess just being tolerant of change is really important. Lots of people get very used to a comfortable life, whatever that is. But I was always very tolerant of change. When I was young, I used to take it really quite seriously, and I would practice sleeping without a pillow, so that if ever I was in a situation where there wasn't a pillow, I would be used to it, or brushing my teeth without water, or all these other things. I don't know why I felt I needed to train for that type of stuff, but I did. And then just being accepting of whatever circumstance you find yourself in, I think is really important. Like we should be flexible, we should be accepting of these things, and that enables you to enjoy a much broader range of environments if you're not very particular about the types of situations that you're comfortable in. I simply find myself comfortable in more or less any kind of circumstance, and that's enabled me to enjoy being in these environments as opposed to just to tolerate it.
Sir, also, as we've heard, India recently reintroduced cheetahs in its wildlife system, and they've been imported from Namibia and South Africa. Right. So, do you think this method of reintroducing species can work out in non-native environments as well?
It's a good question. The wisdom of that introduction is yet to be determined, and whether it should have been wiser to have introduced them from Asian populations of cheetah rather than African populations of cheetah, only time will tell. I think humankind has to be really wary of interventions. We've made so many interventions that have backfired upon us that we have to be sure to do the right thing. Interventions absolutely can have an impact. Reintroductions can have a really positive impact on the environment, but we shouldn't be blind to the unintended consequences. So any such intervention should be really, really well thought out and not just done for clicks on your social media. And lots of organizations, lots of countries are all too enthusiastic to make those types of interventions because it will generate them some positive press, as opposed to something that will actually have a genuinely positive impact on their biodiversity.
Dr. Niall, I have an interesting question. Coming from a continent which lost almost all of its wildlife long way back, that's the European continent. And
where
if
I
you
live.
had to conserve wildlife habitat, you have to go to Africa, maybe Asia, something like that. So how challenging it was to first find wildlife in your own continent, and then maybe train yourself and learn these conservation techniques, and then travel towards Africa or Asian countries to be actively involved in it. Because I think half of the life is spent in Zimbabwe.
I spend a lot of time in Zimbabwe now, and previously spent a huge amount of time in Latin America and other places. And you're right, Britain in particular has a terrible record on conservation, lamentable record on conservation. That's slowly changing. There are some fantastic reintroductions happening, to go back to Barminder's question, and some other really excellent interventions that are trying to bring nature back to the UK. But it is difficult for a young British biologist to find the type of natural history in our own environment that inspires people. But you just need to look more closely. We don't have tigers, and we don't have gaur, and we don't have elephants or rhinos, but we do have badgers and red deer and hedgehogs and fabulous bird life. And so you can get enthusiastic and inspired by our own wildlife. One of the things that's interesting, Britain has a population that is massively engaged in conservation. Very, very interested. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has 3 million members out of a human population of 60 million. That's a very high percentage. 5% of the population is a paid member of a wildlife organization. That's massive. But we still have this terrible biodiversity ourselves, massively negative impact on our biodiversity through intensive agriculture and development, overuse of cars and all kinds of other things. So we do need to start focusing a lot more efforts on our own biodiversity as well as on foreign biodiversity. Britain is very, very good about exporting our conservationists and having a positive impact on biodiversity around the world. We need to do better at retaining some of that expertise and applying it to our own country too.
Sir, I would like to ask for your opinion that if we as responsible citizens work in the right direction, where do you see the world in the next 20 years in terms of human progress?
Yeah, fascinating question. I think difficult to define progress, but for me, the most important act of progress that we can perform is in what many people might say an act of regression. It's in giving something back to nature as opposed to just taking for ourselves. We have progressed so much by being relentlessly consumptive and always building things up for ourselves. And I think the most important way we can progress in the future is to start giving something back to the planet as well.
Sir, to end on a very light note, could I just ask you one thing?
Of course.
Out of all your adventurous experiences, cycling over the Himalayas, rowing the Atlantic Ocean, and skiing across Greenland, which one was your favorite and what enchanted you most about it?
Oh, really hard to say. Because again, favorite is difficult. So rowing the Atlantic was an astonishing thing. It was definitely the most challenging, and I feel I benefited the most from it in terms of personal development. But a lot of it was pretty unpleasant. You're constantly terrified. You're very uncomfortable. It's a really difficult thing to do. So it's difficult to define favorites. For me, the favorite expedition I've probably done was in 2014. I went out to eastern Greenland and spent about 2 weeks climbing and rock climbing and ice climbing, and then flying off the summits of mountains in eastern Greenland using a thing called a speedwing, which is a small paraglider. And I did that with my brother. And the reason that expedition was my favorite was not only because we were doing something that was almost continually enjoyable, but I was doing it with someone that was brilliant. And spending time with great people doing great things is what I'm all about. You can have wonderful experiences by yourself or despite the company, but it's nice to do these types of things with really good people. And so for me, that's probably the most special exhibition of all, because it was done with my brother, as well as doing something that was challenging and in an extraordinary landscape.
Okay, I think that's the end of all their little questions, and you've been very patient also. I must let you know that I'm also again grateful for Dr. Niall, because he's also one of our patrons for Act Now, and I remember sending a small email, and he readily agreed even without looking left and right. And all our efforts are targeted towards young students like you across the world. When the event day, I hope to be reaching around 1 million students and youth across 113 or 15 countries. The only objective is that if some of you can turn into conservators, protectionists, and as Dr. Niall would say, we need people from all walks of life, because environment belongs to all of us. Rather, we belong to the environment that we live in. So thank you, Dr. Niall, so much for being here. I'm sure that this discussion, this interview will be remembered by at least these two students all their life, and wherever they are, whatever they do, they will always try to further the cause that we are trying to push them to. So thank you so much. We'll stay just for a second for a screenshot, and then we'll formally close this interview.
Thank you, sir, for spending your precious time with us.
Thank you for having me and asking such great questions.
It's a time, and now